For centuries, power was easy to recognize. It wore crowns. It commanded armies. It ruled land by force and bloodline. If a king lost a war, he lost his throne. If a dynasty failed, it vanished from history. But in the late 18th century, a different kind of power began to rise. One that didn't depend on territory. One that didn't collapse when borders changed. One that could survive revolutions, wars, and regime changes. This power did not rule openly. It financed. The story begins in Frankfurt, inside the Jewish ghetto, in a narrow street marked by a red shield hanging above a doorway. That symbol, the red shield, would later give a family its name. Rothschild, Mayer Amschel. Rothschild was not born into nobility. He had no title, no land, and no political authority. What he had was access. He worked as a coin dealer and rare antiquities trader, supplying European aristocrats with old currency, metals, and collectibles. Through this trade, he gained something far more valuable than money. He gained proximity to power. One of his early patrons was Wilhelm Nanumea, the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel. One of the wealthiest rulers in Europe at the time, Wilhelm possessed enormous reserves of gold, much of it earned by renting his soldiers to foreign powers. Mayer Rothschild didn't rule Wilhelm. He managed his money. And that relationship revealed a truth that would define the modern financial world. Rulers could command armies, but they did not understand capital. They depended on people who did. Mayer Rothschild saw what most monarchs missed. Europe was changing. Wars were no longer short campaigns fought for land. They were becoming prolonged, industrialized conflicts that required logistics, supply chains, and enormous financing. Governments could no longer rely on taxes alone. They needed credit, and credit created dependence. So Mayer did something unprecedented. Instead of building a single banking house, he built a network. He sent his 5 sons to Europe's most important power centers. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Salomon went to Vienna. Nathan went to London. Karl went to Naples. James went to Paris. Each son operated independently, but they were connected through private couriers, coded correspondence, and absolute family trust. This network moved information faster than any government. In an age before telegraphs, before railroads, before instant communication, speed was everything. Knowing which army won a battle first could determine the fate of markets, currencies, and governments. The Rothschilds didn't just move money, they moved knowledge. And knowledge, when paired with capital, becomes leverage. The Napoleonic Wars transformed this network into something unprecedented. As Europe burned, governments desperately needed funding. Britain needed gold to pay its armies across the continent. France needed credit to sustain Napoleon's campaigns. Smaller states needed stability to survive. The Rothschilds financed all of them, not out of loyalty, out of strategy. Nathan Rothschild, operating from London, became the British government's primary financier, moving gold across Europe to fund Wellington's troops. His logistical network was so efficient that it outperformed state systems. At the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, when Napoleon was finally defeated, the Rothschild courier network reportedly delivered the news to Nathan in London before the British government received official confirmation. Markets reacted before the state could. Whether the specific trades are mythologized or not, the principle is undeniable. The Rothschilds had built a system that could act faster than governments, and speed creates dominance. After the wars ended, something remarkable happened. Kings owed them, not just money, but stability. Governments turned to the Rothschilds to refinance debt, stabilize currencies, and rebuild economies. Entire national bond markets were structured around Rothschild underwriting. They became indispensable. And here's the key insight. The Rothschilds never tried to replace kings directly. They replaced their function. Rulers still governed. Parliaments still passed laws. Empires still expanded and collapsed. But the financial architecture beneath them remained intact. When a monarchy fell, the debt remained. When a regime changed, the bonds were honored. When borders shifted, capital flowed around them. This is the blueprint. Do not attach power to territory. Attach it to systems. Do not rule visibly. Rule structurally. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschilds were involved in financing railways, mining operations, central banks, and national treasuries across Europe. They advised governments. They influenced monetary policy. They shaped economic outcomes without ever holding office. They were not kings. They didn't need to be. Because once money becomes the foundation of power, those who control its flow control the limits of every political decision. And the most important part of the blueprint wasn't wealth, it was continuity. Kings ruled for lifetimes, governments ruled for terms, financial dynasties ruled across centuries. They survived revolutions because revolutions still needed financing. They survived regime change because new governments inherited old debts. They survived wars because both sides needed credit. This is why the Rothschild model spread. Other banking families copied it. States institutionalized it. Central banks formalized it. By the time a modern nation-states emerged, the rules were already set. Power no longer needed to sit on a throne. It lived inside balance sheets, debt markets, and financial systems that outlasted any ruler. And once that transition was complete, history itself changed direction. Because from that point on, the most powerful forces shaping the world were no longer visible. They were financial. Once the Rothschild Blueprint proved it could outlast kings, it did something far more dangerous. It normalized itself. What began as a family strategy slowly became the operating system of modern states. By the mid-19th century, governments no longer asked whether they should borrow. They asked how. National debt stopped being an emergency measure and became permanent policy. Bonds replaced taxes as the primary funding tool of empires. And whoever controlled bond markets controlled the survival of governments. This is where the shift became irreversible. Because debt does not disappear when rulers change. When France executed its monarchy, it inherited the same financial obligations. When empires collapsed, successor states inherited their liabilities. Revolutions erased symbols, not balance sheets, and this taught financial dynasties a powerful lesson. They did not need loyalty, they needed continuity. The Rothschilds understood that modern power could not rely on individuals. Individuals die, dynasties fracture, governments fall, but institutions endure. So the blueprint evolved again. Instead of financing kings directly, finance embedded itself inside the state. Central banks emerged not as democratic inventions, but as stabilizing tools for debt. Their public role was simple: control inflation, manage liquidity, stabilize markets. Their real role was more subtle: remove money from politics. Once monetary policy became independent, elected governments lost control over the most powerful lever in the economy. Interest rates were no longer debated openly. Money creation became technical, abstract, and inaccessible to the public. Financial decisions moved behind closed doors. This wasn't a conspiracy, it was efficiency. And efficiency always centralizes power. By the late 19th century, central banking had become the standard model. Britain had it, France adopted it, Germany followed. Eventually, the United States did as well. Each time the justification was stability, and each time the result was the same. Money creation became detached from democratic oversight. Financial dynasties didn't need to own central banks outright. They needed proximity. They needed influence. They needed to sit close enough to shape rules, advise policy, and anticipate outcomes. And because these institutions were framed as neutral, technical, and non-political, public resistance faded. People don't protest what they don't understand. As the 20th century began, this system faced its greatest test: World War. Industrial warfare demanded financing on a scale never seen before. Governments printed, borrowed, expanded debt massively. Gold standards collapsed under pressure. Currencies were severed from physical restraint. And after the wars ended, debt did not contract. It expanded. The Bretton Woods system didn't reverse this. It refined it. Global finance became coordinated. The dollar became the reserve currency. Institutions were created to manage international debt relationships. For the first time in history, power operated above nations. Countries that controlled liquidity gained influence without conquest. Countries that borrowed lost sovereignty without invasion. This is why modern empires don't occupy territory. They occupy balance sheets. And once this system was established, it no longer needed dynastic names to function. The blueprint had been absorbed into law, regulation, and global architecture. Financial dynasties had done what kings never could. They built power that didn't need legitimacy. It only needed stability. By the late 20th century, most people no longer knew where power lived. They knew their job, their mortgage, their taxes. But they did not know who decided how money entered the system. They did not know who benefited first when liquidity was created. And they did not know who bore the cost when systems failed. This wasn't because information was hidden. It was because complexity replaced visibility. Modern financial systems are not designed to be understood by the public. They are designed to function without consent. And that is the final evolution of the Rothschild Blueprint. Power no longer needs obedience. It needs dependency. When individuals depend on wages, they comply. When businesses depend on credit, they conform. When governments depend on markets, they adjust policy. No orders are issued, no force is required. The system selects outcomes automatically. Crashes do not destroy the system, they reinforce it. In every major crisis, the same pattern repeats. Assets are protected, institutions are stabilized, losses are socialized. The public experiences instability, the system experiences consolidation. This is why financial dynasties survive crises. They are positioned upstream. They do not wait for recovery, they profit from volatility. And this is why history keeps repeating itself. Not because humans fail to learn, but because systems reward behavior that concentrates power. Kings ruled land, financial dynasties ruled credit. Modern institutions rule flows. The faces change, the structure does not. And once you understand this, the world stops looking chaotic. Crises stop feeling random. Policy decisions stop feeling confusing. History stops looking accidental. It becomes patterned. This does not mean resistance is impossible. It means resistance must be intelligent. Because power today does not sit on thrones, it sits inside systems. And the first step to navigating those systems is seeing them clearly. That is why this history matters. Not to create fear, not to sell certainty, but to replace illusion with understanding. If you want more documentaries that explain how money, power, and history actually work beneath the surface, without hype, without distraction, and without pretending these patterns don't exist, this channel is built for that purpose. Subscribe and stay with us. Because the most important forces shaping the future are the ones most people never learn to see.